Um, we're recording. We decided to open Grit up to any man who just wants to attend from now on. So from this point forward, it'll be, you still have to have an invitation to be able to come to the meeting, but feel free to throw the invitation out there when you get your invitation for that month. Throw it out there to anybody you know who might want to come. And the more guys we could get here, the better off we are. And the more we get to share awesome speakers like Brent today. The next thing I wanted to encourage everybody is when you meet somebody on our Grit, you can stay in contact with them. So use Grit the way it's meant to be. Send messages to each other, post stuff on there, post pictures, make comments about our show. The more we can get everybody involved in it, it just makes it better for everybody involved. So with that said, enough of me. I'm going to introduce Brent. Today we have Brent Billings with us, who is man. I got way too many good things to say about him. I listened to he's the co-host of a podcast that man, I don't even know how many listeners do you guys have, Brent? The number's incredible. I can imagine.
Yeah, that's a great question that we don't necessarily know the answer to. Probably somewhere between 50 and 100,000, maybe more. It's hard to tell. We have probably, what we have, the best number that we have are the download numbers. And we know that as far as the people who are caught up to our most recent episode, those numbers are around 20,000. But we know we have tons of people who, I just heard from somebody, this week, like, hey, I just found the podcast and I've been listening for the last couple of weeks. I finished session 1. And it's like, those people are jumping in all the time. So it's really hard to tell. But yeah, it's a very humbling number, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, it is. So how did BEMA get started, and how did you get started with BEMA?
So Marty went to Israel with Ray Vandelon in 2008, and that was his first trip over there. And he had some, a few lessons or experiences before that, but that was really like the transformational moment for him. And he came back and basically upended everything that he was doing, considered his Jewish heritage for the first time, ultimately made the decision with his wife that they wanted to live that out and use that as an example. And then I think it was 2010 when he moved to Moscow, Idaho to do campus ministry at the University of Idaho and Washington State University. And 2011, he started the first round of BEMA, just teaching a handful of students at each university a couple times a week. And I moved to Moscow in 2012 and started working for the church that Impact is partnered with here, and just started having conversations with Marty. I would walk down the hall and hear him teaching his class, a couple times a week, and heard him preach a few times. He got into the preaching team at the church. And so when he started up the second round in 2013, I was like, well, I want to get in on this and dedicate more time to it. So I went through BEMA for the first time, 2013 through 2015, and then started on my second round. Like, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I've listened to the podcast 2 times through. It's like, yeah, I definitely did that same kind of thing when I first went through it. Then went to Israel and Turkey with him in 2016. And as soon as we got back from that trip, he started the podcast. So yeah, we kind of go through like the full story of that at the very beginning of session 6. I think it's episode 204, where I give like the full accounting of that story, but that's kind of the brief overview of it.
Yeah. Well, I know when me and my wife discovered you guys, we started from season 1. We started listening to you guys from season 1, and we haven't gotten all the way through yet, but we're getting close. So my next question for you is, tell us a little how studying for BEMA has changed the way you see the Bible from season 1, because I've seen a change in you from season 1, to current. So how did that impact you and the way you see the Bible and study the Bible.
Yeah. I mean, I basically entirely ignored the prophets prior to this. I ignored most of Torah. There's just so much I didn't really know how to engage with. I would read the prophets. I'm like, oh man, I don't understand this at all. I don't understand what they're getting at. I don't understand what they're trying to do. And it's not like I've had a chance to study all of the prophets in depth at this point, but it's like having just a minimal framework to approach something with just makes it so much more um so much easier to engage with. Same thing with the stuff like Leviticus and even Revelation and just all of that stuff, like just having that framework, understanding that it's all part of one big narrative that God's telling. Like there's just so much about it that just makes it like, oh, this is connected, this is relevant, this is important. There are things that I can learn from this. So yeah, I mean it's pretty much changed everything, I think.
Yeah, I know for me it's reading through Deuteronomy and Numbers and all that stuff. It can get very liturgical, and until you finally get it all into context, and you're like, oh, I understand now. This is where this falls into place, and this is how this all works, and this is how this all comes together, and this is how it all points back to this, and it becomes interesting at that point. It does change your outlook. So tell us a little bit about what do you guys got coming up for Bama? Is there anything new and upcoming for this season or next season?
I mean, we're going verse by verse through John right now. That's mostly going to take us through the end of the year. We've got a few like um, individual episodes sprinkled in there, a few things that the other co-hosts are preparing, a little like mini series, like 3 or 4 week things. And then early next year, we're all going to get together in person and have a big Bama planning meeting. So I don't really know a whole lot past like maybe the first month or two of 2023. But man, we have such a huge list of like potential topics and ideas that people have sent in and requests. And by far the biggest thing that we were asked to talk about prior to what we're doing right now is the book of John. So we're
Yeah.
knocking that one out over the course of almost a year, I think is what that runtime is.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I don't know a whole lot, but I do know we have lots of ideas, and yeah, we're gonna keep going for
Well, I know it's going to be
as
exciting
long as
'cause,
God wants us to, I think.
yeah, I know it's going to be exciting because I haven't listened to one episode from you guys yet that wasn't, I just wasn't glued to it. So I want to encourage all you guys listening today to go and find these guys. Tell the guys how they can go and find your podcast.
Yeah, so it's the Bama podcast, BEMA. You can search for it in Apple Podcasts or whatever. We're not on Spotify. That's a question that we get a lot. You can see that on our FAQ on the website, but BamaDiscipleship.com. Some people listen directly from the website. That's totally fine. Like whatever works. And we've got links there, and there's show notes and presentations that go with some of the episodes, and yeah, lots of ways to engage with it.
Yeah, well, I want to encourage you guys to go and find their podcast and start from season one, because I promise you, you'll be blessed. You won't, if you start in the middle, you're just going to end up going back anyway. So go start from season one and go all the way through. You'll be blessed. And just remember, these guys, this is a ministry. So if you guys get something from it, if it blesses your heart, if you get teachings and blessings and all that from it, support these guys, because it is a ministry, and we know that bringing the gospel is free, but bringing it to the masses is not. So it does take resources. So I encourage you guys to go and do that. So
Yeah.
with all that said, I want to turn this over to Britt, and I know I've been excited, and the guys I've been talking to about this are really excited. So I'm gonna let you have it.
Thank you. Yeah, and I will just say, like, starting from the beginning, like we definitely, especially the first 5 sessions, we're very much assuming that you're going through in order. We talk about things earlier on, and we save other things for later when we have the right kind of context. So starting from the beginning is definitely important. What I'm talking about today is from pretty early on in that story, although so in session 6 we actually added a few extra teachers, and this kind of teaching is definitely not my forte. This is probably the most ambitious thing I've done um, in this regard. So I definitely had a lot of help from Josh Bosse. If any of you guys know who that is, if you've heard him in session 6, or if you're on the BMOS Slack, you'll see him quite a bit. He definitely helped me develop this teaching. So huge bit of credit to Josh for that. But yeah, we're going to be talking about Hagar and her story, what we see how she interacts with God and stuff. So to begin talking about Hagar, we got to start with her name. And her name means flight, as in to flee. And you kind of see that a lot in her story. The root primarily means to wander, especially outside of one's homeland. It's the word that we see used to describe Avram's sojourning in foreign lands. And it's ultimately unsurprising, since so much of Hagar's story involves running and leaving and abandoning and escaping. But why is she fleeing all the time? What is she running from? And at least regarding the sojourning aspect of her name, we do have a direct answer from that. We're told that Hagar is Egyptian, and the rabbis have traditionally taught that she was an Egyptian princess gifted to Abraham as a servant by Pharaoh, which is a pretty violent shift in circumstances for her. So it's not hard to imagine a little bit further that this would kind of be a catalyst for her to start running. And so it's significant that Hagar's role as a surrogate came with being Abraham's wife. Specifically, she's labeled a wife in the text. If we look at Jacob, we see his wives surrogates, Bilhah and Zilpah. They did not enjoy that status. They didn't get to keep their children as their own. They were not considered part of Jacob's family, and they are not honored in any tradition as matriarchs. So this kind of leads one to believe, in contrast, Avraham and Sarah were earnestly inviting Hagar into their family and the family of God. But it's also clear that they didn't fully commit to making Hagar an equal partner. They continue to refer to her and treat her as a servant. But if we return to Hagar's side of the story, it's important to pay attention to the beginning of the cycle of suffering in their family dynamic. The instant she gains an advantage over Sarah by conceiving Ishmael, she treats Sarah as cursed. And that's pretty serious implications for that in their time. Curses and blessings, for that matter, are active agents in their minds. When you say a blessing on someone or a curse on someone, like, they believe that God is actively involved in carrying out whatever that is. So there's no like casual blessing or casual curse. Like, when you do that, it is a serious thing. But that doesn't really justify Avraham and Sarah's treatment of Hagar. And also, Hagar does not bear the blame for the breakdown of their family. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. But it seems pretty clear that even before she runs away, she's not really emotionally ready to be part of the family. And that does make sense, because she was abandoned by her own family. She's pretty jaded about the idea of family. She was given transactionally to Abraham, and she sees relationships in this transactional way as contests of power and advantage. And Abraham and Sarah's attempts to expand their family might have been done with the best of intentions, and they don't quite stoop to the level of treating Hagar like property as her own father did. But their actions do play into the narrative. And so after Sarah's retaliation and Avraham backing her up, Hagar is in this powerless position, likely with this really like bone deep fear, this certainty that she is being abandoned. And so she runs away. And it shouldn't really surprise us where she runs. We're told the angel finds her at a spring on the road to Shur, which was a place on the border of Palestine and Egypt. So Hagar is running back to Egypt, where she's from. She's trying to go home, trying to find a family, even though she's running from the family who actually does want her. in spite of their failings. So we're going to jump forward for a moment to Genesis 21. I want to read that real quick, just because there's some details in here that I don't know. This is one of the things that Bema has really taught me, is just not to read over all of the details. There's so many things in those things that we don't really think of. So it says here, Genesis 21, the child, as in Isaac, grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. And I don't know what it was. Like, it never occurred to me before, the last few years, the importance of Hagar being an Egyptian at all, or even the fact that she was. I don't think I would have, a few years ago, I don't think I would have been able to tell you that Hagar was Egyptian. Like that detail just never stuck out to me, but it's so important for this story. Continuing on. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son, but God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. So even in Abraham's perspective, he sees that God is going to bless Hagar. So he knows that. But at the same time, Sarah is saying, get rid of her. And God says, well, go ahead and do what Sarah says. So it's a very confusing, like, set of circumstances. But so it says, early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. As she sat there, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. Another detail, it's like, oh, well, who cares where the wife's, like, man, what a crucial detail that is. But yeah, so we see, interestingly, there's this whole range of parallels between this story and actually the Garden of Eden, from Genesis 21. So Sarah demands Abraham drive out Hagar, using the same word that was first mentioned when God drives Adam and Eve out of the garden. And her reasoning is actually similar to God's. God doesn't want humans to eat both fruits of the garden, and Sarah does not want both descendants, which is another kind of fruit, to have an inheritance together, to be in the same Beit of that father's house. Like, they can't. She doesn't want that. She feels threatened by that. Like, there's all sorts of reasons for that, but she doesn't want that. God tells Abraham to listen to the voice of his wife, which is a parallel to Adam's story. Hagar's eyes are opened, just like Adam and Eve's. And the inciting incidents of each of these stories involves seeing. Sarah seeing the mockery of Hagar's fruit, Ishmael, and Eve seeing the tree's fruit. So what's also interesting throughout the story is Ishmael's name is never used, perhaps indicating that he isn't acting on his own. He doesn't really have any agency. He's just working on his mother's orders or her influence or whatever. And kind of like she's hiding behind him through the story, but then she later hides him in a bush out of fear, exactly like Adam and Eve's actions, the hiding in a bush out of fear. There are there's more parallels to look at there. But yeah, suffice to say that it's definitely meant to echo Adam and Eve leaving the garden in this story. So Hagar is leaving her family again, this time in Genesis 21 against her will. Even though we can also see kind of the same threads of her internally fleeing the family of God. So just like the Eden story, it's kind of easy to, look at this at a superficial level and use the story to condemn either party, really. Adam and Eve disobeyed. Hagar instigates suffering, but God and Abraham and Sarah are pretty harsh in their response, seemingly. But underneath the story, it seems like Hagar is meant to be kind of this deeply sympathetic character. She's not perfect. She bears wounds very deeply. She carries this suffering that's beyond her ability to control. And that seeps into every relationship, even with her son. She wants something that she can't really seem to grasp, even when it's right in front of her. She's fleeing the whole world. She's fleeing Abraham. She's fleeing the family who wants her. But that's kind of like something that I think most of us can connect with on a visceral level. Like, we do know that these people want us, but we also are kind of afraid because we feel like we've made a mistake or whatever. Like there's some things there that I think we can identify with. So without spinning it into like this happy ending, where Hagar is redeemed in her future, I want to go back to her past for a moment, to her very first encounter with God, when she's running back to Egypt. So that's Genesis 15. Let me bring that up here. Or I'm sorry, not 15. 16 is where we are. Sarai, Avram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Like, again, with the Egyptian thing, it's like, how did I not notice this before? Like, the Bible is telling us multiple times. She had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Avram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." So that's where we see like they are inviting her to be, an integral part of this family. Avram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Avram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar. Like, they're seriously just beating this Egyptian drum, and I, for whatever reason, willfully ignored it for so many years. Gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Avram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your slave is in your hands," Avram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. So it's interesting that she is given to Abraham as a wife, but then Sarai still holds the seniority over her fate, basically. Certainly there are many strange dynamics here that we don't necessarily have to deal with today, but it is interesting to look at that dynamic and how that plays out. The angel of the Lord. Okay, so here's her. So she leaves. She fled. Sarai mistreated Hagar, so Hagar fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai," she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress, and submit to her." The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers." She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." That is why the well was called Bir Lahai-roi. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Avram a son, and Avram gave him the name Ishmael to the son who was born. Avram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. So notice that when the angel speaks to her, if you're a podcast listener, you might remember early on. I think it's somewhere in session 1. I can't remember exactly, but basically, it's something with the story of Avraham. But it says here, the angel found her, and she answered him, and says the angel told her, "Go back, blah blah blah." End quote. And then it says the angel added, "I will increase your descendants, blah blah blah." End quote. And then it says the angel of the Lord also said to her, quote, "You're now pregnant, blah blah blah." So there's no dialogue back and forth going on here. But when the Bible does that, when the Bible has a single character speaking, in the case of the story, I think it was Avram when he was first getting the covenant, the blood path covenant. But in that story, God speaks, and then he stops talking, and then it says, "And God said." So there's this gap in time. So the angel has these 3 separate utterances to Hagar. First saying, "Go back," then "I will increase your descendants," and then finally it's like a song, basically. I don't know. I'm assuming there's something about the Hebrew that structures it that makes it this, but you see it in your Bible, like it's set off, it's indented, it's set in like this lyrical sort of format. So you see that there's something different about it. But there's these 3 separate things. So the angel says something, and then there's no response from Hagar. So then the angel tries a second approach, and there's still no response from Hagar. And then finally, the third thing. So the angel begins by telling her to go back, which you can kind of imagine, like, okay, Hagar's maybe going to cross her arms. She's going to have this like stone cold, defiant stance, this silence. And so then the angel makes this promise about descendants. And even that is not good enough. It doesn't really move Hagar's independence. It doesn't give her a way to find her own way. And what's maybe interesting is not so much Hagar's wonderful portion of chutzpah here to have this like, oh, you're an angel, but I'm not just gonna take the first thing you say. Like, I'm gonna sit there. But what is it that actually does reach her heart and get her to actually move and do something? So what is it about this song? And so looking at this kind of on that surface level, the angel is mostly reiterating the same promise, but there are some additions, and yet those additions don't seem positive. So what is it about the song that moves her to head back into this difficult family situation that she's found herself in? What gets her to stop running? So her response, I think, says it all. God has actually seen her. She doesn't want promises about how good things are going to be. There's this moment where the Lord says, or the Lord through the angel, like, hey, there's misery, there's defiance, there's struggle. Like, that's what I'm seeing. And Hagar hears that and says, that's me. God really knows me. If that's what he's seeing, like, that is my experience. God really does see me. So I would say my first observation is that what moves us toward the most difficult struggles in our life is hope dancing with despair. It doesn't dismiss it or ignore it, but you lift it up just a little bit, take a little bit of the weight off of the despair. And the practical implication I take from it is that building the kingdom isn't about forming perfect communities that solve all the problems, but communities that can look at our misery and our despair and our struggle and hold it, lighten it, maybe dance with it a little bit. So the second question I want to wrestle with, that involves the narrative tension between this moment in Genesis 16 and Genesis 21. If God knows Hagar needs to leave eventually, why is the angel there to send her back? So what's so important about her and Avraham and Sarah being kind of miserable for 13 more years? If the point isn't ultimately to keep this group of people together, why is God putting them together for this time? And so I think that's where the garden parallel becomes important. The time in the garden functions kind of like a honeymoon period. And just like in the desert, Adam and Eve didn't have to worry about food or clothing. All they needed to do was get to know God and each other. And just like the Israelites in the desert, Adam and Eve didn't do that perfectly, yet God's intention was still somehow accomplished. So before they leave, Adam stops calling Eve the woman and gives her a name, Eve, because he realizes she is his source of life. Eve means life, and she's not this source of temptation. Like there's a greater reality to who she is. And even though Israel doesn't always trust God, they walk out of that desert honeymoon with Torah, with the books of Moses. Like they have learned who God is and what his mission is and how they can be close to him. They, even though they make a lot of mistakes in the desert, they walk out of there with that knowledge base, with that really intimate knowledge of who God is and what their relationship with God is. So what does Hagar leave with? So again, on the surface level, we see, unlike her flight from her first flight in Genesis 16, she doesn't head home in Genesis 21. She wanders in the desert. So something has changed. She doesn't feel that connection to Egypt that she had before, at least not fully. We do see ultimately that she goes and gets a wife for Ishmael from Egypt. So it's not over. Like there's still some of that holding on to her, but something has changed in her. So Abraham gives her bread and water for the journey. So it's like Sarah is saying like, hey, get rid of her. And Abraham's like, okay. And God says, go ahead and listen to Sarah. And he's like, okay, but he still shows that hospitality that we know Abraham is really known for. He gives her bread and water. She also has this chance, Hagar has this chance to see a husband standing up for his barren wife over his fertile wife, which is absolutely bonkers to consider in their time. Like fertility is such a massive part of someone's importance, especially women at that time. So like to see Avram stand up for that, even though it's messed up, even though there's problems, Hagar sees like, oh, there is something different about this guy. The patriarch she saw from her birth, her dad treated her like a piece of property, even though she was a princess. Like, again, messed up, but Abraham's different than that. So in short, she sees this family that's trying to trust the story. And she comes back to that family because God saw her. And then in staying with that family, she has this chance to see God. And so it's kind of actually a shocking statement. When she's talking to the angel, she says, I have now seen the God who sees me. And that's pretty unusual. There's a number of people in Torah who get to hear God, but seeing God is a totally different thing. Like that's rare. Usually people, when they have this type of encounter, are shocked that they're still alive. It is very powerful. It's very intimate to see God in their time, in their culture. And so I think Hagar in this moment decides to head back, not only because she saw the glimpse of God, but she wants to see more of this God. She wants to understand more about the God who actually sees her. So to bring it into maybe a more modern context, staying in a faith community sometimes can feel as difficult and futile as Hagar heading back to Sarah. But at the same time, I think it's important to remember that the point of community is not to find a group we can stay with forever. Like nothing really is forever. And so maybe there's a point, that 13 years that she goes back to the family before she ultimately leaves again, like there was something there. the family of God isn't like this filing cabinet that we just kind of like get put in a particular place where we belong, and then that's it. Like, it's this living, moving body. And the more we know about the body, the more we know and understand and experience the body, the better we can see the God who sees us. And so I don't think it's an accident that the defiant struggle of Hagar is mirrored in the qualities of Jacob, whose name becomes the name of God's people. We're not living in the garden, and we could agonize over that idealized perfect world and perfect community and perfect family. Like, we could long for that, but there is a real God right in front of us. And so God is seeing you through every face in that body. And through those faces, we can see God without fear. So I think what I love about the story of Hagar, or at least one of the things, is that it reminds me God isn't trying to bring us back to the garden. God's okay with us moving on. Like, redemption can happen without meaning that everything has to go back to the way it was. When I see how God blesses Hagar, that's the kind of blessing I want. I'm not looking for like $1 million or this like mansion or big house or whatever, fancy car. Like, none of that. That stuff isn't really the blessing. I want God to bless what God truly sees in me and what God sees that is true in me. When God gives us hope, it's not in like this future sense that obliterates all of our problems. I want a hope that can dance with the despair that I'm in now and slowly bring me out of that. So it's a blessing that makes room for our struggle. And I pray that Hagar, that like Hagar, we see the goodness of this blessing and the wonder of truly being seen.
Wow, that's good. Isn't that ultimately what we all want? I mean, if we stop and think about it for a minute, isn't that ultimately what we all want, is to know that God sees us? Yeah. I mean, I do. So at this point, guys, we want to open it up for questions. Is there anybody who's got questions, or is there something you want to comment on, Rick? I know, Michael, you're in there. Pipe in, guys.
Looks like we do have one hand up.
Hi, Brent. Thank you for that wonderful teaching. It was good to be reminded that when God sees people, it reminded me when Israel was slaves in Egypt for 400 years, and they cried out to him that he took notice of them. And it's such a great connection there. I noticed another thing too in the story that was just a wonderful blessing for Hagar, and that was when later when God comes to Abraham at age 99 and tells him Sarah's going to have a son, and this is how you're going to keep the covenant and establish my covenant, pass it down, is that all your male descendants will be circumcised. And he says, Abraham, I think he says also, God says that Isaac will receive the blessing of the covenant. And Abraham was actually fighting for his son Ishmael. Well, I wish, I would that he would too. And God said, well, no, it's going to be Isaac. But what's interesting is that when God told Abraham that all of his descendants were to be circumcised, his very first offspring that he circumcised was Ishmael. And, that was before Isaac was born. And I think there was such a great connection. And if you can see down the road from where Hagar ran away and the angel told her to go back, the angel didn't reveal everything to her, but the fact that Ishmael, even at the age of maybe 13, was circumcised when God gave that that blessing of circumcision is a sign of the covenant. Her son came under that particular covenant of circumcision even before Isaac was born. You know, there are multiple covenants that God gives. And so the covenant he gives to Isaac and then to Jacob is in addition to the covenant of circumcision. But I think it's such a beautiful, beautiful connection there that Hagar must look back from that point and see, if I hadn't come back, my son wouldn't have been circumcised and he wouldn't have received that covenant. And so that's a sign that continues. I mean, God calls out to all peoples on the earth, and there's a very special calling to the descendants of Ishmael, who I guess today are Muslims. There's a special calling that God is calling them all back through that covenant of circumcision that he gave them all. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, and I think in the in the desert experience with the Israelites, we see God saying that his people are going to be a kingdom of priests, and we know in Egypt, in Egyptian culture, the priests were actually circumcised. And God's saying, well, I'm actually going to set my entire people apart for this work of priesthood, of showing who I am to the world. And I wonder if that was a practice back then as well, and if Hagar, being Egyptian, said, oh well, if you're gonna set your other son apart for this, like, I want my son to have that special designation as well. So I don't actually know, but that has me thinking about some things, so thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I think the circumcisions were a little different in Egypt. From what I read, the circumcision was like a nick, something symbolic, whereas in Judaism they make a full circle circumcision, and so and even the fact that Ishmael was foretold he'd have 12 princes for sons. And it just, when you look at that, Jacob also had 12 sons that would become 12 tribes. I think God is really calling out and linking the two peoples. They have more in common than most people think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looks like we got another hand here.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let's making sure. First off, this is my first time coming to Grit, so
Well, welcome, Connor.
it was a really cool. It's a really cool experience. For those of you who don't know me, which is everyone, I'm Connor. I don't think anyone knows me here, but I thought it was interesting. This is my first time ever reading about Hagar. I've read Genesis. I feel like it's my first time reading about Hagar. I thought it was interesting when he said that we don't have to return to the Garden of Eden for redemption, because I feel like so often we think of that when we think of, I feel like we just think of that when it comes to, redemption, and we think of Garden of Eden, but it doesn't have to be that way. It can be something completely different. And this is just really cool experience for me personally. It's just a really cool experience, and I'm really glad that I decided to join. And yeah, it was really cool learning more about Hagar, because I didn't know much about her at all, actually.
Well, we're glad you could join us today, and we hope you keep coming back.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting about Hagar also, that it's like every time you read the Bible and you stop and think about something, it's how something else pops out at you, or somebody can bring a different perspective to it, like this. And it might even change your whole vantage point and how you see it and how you even thought about it before. It just changes it all. And for me, that happens almost every time I read a different, I read the same scripture. You can read the same one 20 times and you get something different from it every time, it seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's always layers.
Yeah. Well, we got another hand.
Hello, all. Can you all see me all right?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hi, this is Richard Cox. Been with the group since you guys started, so appreciate you having me today. I really liked that study as well, the devotional into Hagar. What really got me was that it it was very sympathetic, and I know that when you're just simply reading the text and you're not really trying to glean any context from it or have any kind of empathy for the characters, it's really easy to miss. And so I really appreciated the message today about seeing Hagar as she was. And it actually ties into a few other teachings that I've been listening to recently. I listened to Founded in Truth Ministries, Matthew Vanderel's, and his messages over the last few weeks have been about having empathy and realizing that you don't know the full story about what people are going through, and that the best way to reach out to people and to make connection, like Yeshua did with the woman at the well, is to have conversation. And then what do I hear this morning from a mega church I used to follow before we started keeping Torah, and they're talking specifically about the woman at the well and meeting people where they are, and that God sees you. And then what do I hear today out of this message from Hagar? But that God sees her. And so it just kind of resonated a lot, and I thought I would share that. Is that God does see you, and He sees your strengths and He sees your weaknesses. He created your strengths and He created your weaknesses, and He put them in you so that you would need Him. And you can look at rough examples like Gideon, where he was his strength and He gave him the ability to do all those things. But Gideon's really not that great of an example because he kind of tested God. So you could read a lot of these examples of people in the Bible, and like I said earlier, kind of glaze over the story so that you know it, but you really don't know it. You really don't understand a lot of the context of a lot of things that they're going through. So I appreciated the insight in Hagar. I appreciated even the understanding that rabbis suggested that she's an Egyptian princess. That adds all kinds of context and really things to kind of chew on later. So I'll stop talking after this, but thank you for that message. It was really helpful.
Yeah, it was great. Well, Rick's got a question.
First of all, Brent, just, man, what a blessing you and Marty have been to me and my wife. Randy's wife, Charlie, got us onto Bema back at Hanukkah season, and man, we've just raced through it, and we're just about current. I've just got through your analysis of The Chosen in season 1, and wow, just the way you have revolutionized my way of study and finding things like you kept bringing up Egyptian, and that's things that are catching my eye now that I've never done that before. And seeing things, you talk about the Lord who sees. I mean, the lights are coming on, when you start seeing these little things. And you and Marty had a great conversation in one of the previous podcasts. You talked about Isaac, and he sojourned down after the binding of Isaac. All right, right after that, you don't see Isaac mentioned as leaving with Abraham, and you guys wrestled with that, and it was so good. And he ended up at the same place where Hagar ended up. Is that correct? Is that fair?
I think that's right. Yeah.
I mean, it says he's returning from
the Bir Laharoy.
Yeah, Bir Laharoy. Yeah. So, and do you think there was an interaction there? Do you think maybe he was going back to see her after being, I for the first time ever, I got into the trauma of what it would have been like to be almost killed by your father.
Mm-hmm.
And to understand that this caused a lot of chaos within the family. And we just comment on, I just would love to hear what your take is on all
Boy,
that.
I've never considered that before. That would certainly be interesting. That's kind of what you would expect would be like, it's totally unsurprising looking at Hagar, whether she was a princess or not, you can set that aside. just knowing she's Egyptian, it would make sense when she's in trouble, she's going to go back to Egypt. I think it would totally make sense for Isaac if he's in trouble with his dad, that he's going to go to some other family member. And even though, like, I mean, I don't, it seems like Hagar was pretty well established in the family, like to the point where she would feel like that a family member. So I could totally see him going and spending time with her. Like, okay, like I know you had some problems with my dad. Now he just tried to kill me. Like, how do you move forward from a situation? Like, I could totally see that. So I think
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
that's
how
a
many
great
of
thing.
us, how many of us actually do that in our own lives? You know, he lived with her for 13 years. You know, it's how could he not have made some kind of relationship with her? And
Well,
even
Richard makes a great comment in the chat. He said that clearly Isaac and Ishmael mended fences because they buried together. They buried their father.
yeah,
So great comment, Richard. I mean, you see that there maybe was some mending of these walls that may have been built up by the earlier adolescent Ishmael, you know, and Hagar. So this is the kind of thing that you and Marty are doing for your listeners, is that you are getting us to see scripture not from just the snorkeler's point of view, but we're diving down deep and getting a little deep sea diving and seeing some treasures up close. And I really appreciate that. And
yeah, they're giving us the nuts and bolts of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I think something important to emphasize here is like, I just got into Bama, you know, because I happened to be in the right place at the right time. So I went through the same experience just a few years ahead of the listeners, but Marty went through the same experience a few years ahead of me when he studied with Ray Vandelon, and like Ray studied himself over in Israel. I think he was at Hebrew University. And like all of these people are just like, we're just passing this on. We're all on the same journey here. We're just at slightly different points. So yeah, like being in community, being in relationship with people, that's really the key. Like what you guys have going on here, where, and I love that most of you guys aren't really asking me questions, you're sharing your own thoughts and observations. Like that is the whole point of this wrestling together and being in community together. It is not about what I think. I don't really have any great thoughts. Like I'm just trying to learn. I'm trying to understand how to approach scripture. Like there's nothing special about me. There's nothing that I can do that you guys can't do. So I love how this conversation is going. So keep up what you guys are doing for sure.
Yeah, but what you bring to the table that we don't have is you bring a different perspective that gives us different eyes to see it from. So that's the great part of it.
Yes, but each of you have your own perspective that you can bring to the table. So I would just encourage all of you to keep bringing that perspective, because this has been a really great conversation.
Yeah, well, we more than appreciate. I can't even tell you how much I appreciate you you teaching for us today, and we really hope you come back. And you know, maybe one day we can get Marty on here. Who knows?
Yeah. You should jump ahead. Get Marty, get Josh, maybe, or you know, whoever.
Well, guys, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, where's Darius?
It sounds like he's running around upstairs. I've heard a few heavy footsteps so far. He's probably playing baseball right now.
Well, Brent, we appreciate it. We thank you. Guys, hang with me for just a minute. I got a couple of things I want to put out there. Rick, could you close us in prayer? We've got Stephen we want to pray for, and Jim, we noticed that you're here with us today. We are so glad to see you, brother. We've been worried about you. We're glad that you made it, and God bless that you're here with us today. And could you add Stephen and Jim in our prayers as you close us in prayer today? Rick?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again.
Oh, one more thing. I'm sorry. Forgive me. We have with us Rabbi David Weiss, who will be our teacher next month. And I want to honor Rabbi Weiss. And he was on asking questions a few minutes ago. We just really appreciate that you're going to be with us next month and that you're with us from now on. And guys, I hope you join us next month for the rabbi's teaching. And I just know it's going to be incredible. Go ahead, Rick.
All right. Father, thank you so much. Abba, Father, thank you so much for this time that these men can gather together around your word. We thank you so much for Brent Billings, Lord. Just continue to guide him on the path that you have for him and all that he's doing, both through the BEMA podcast and all the other things that you've given him responsibilities over. Lord, just continue to guide him and direct him in all that he does. Give him the wisdom and the understanding of your will as he walks and wrestles through some of the things that you're developing in him and guiding him into. We just ask a great blessing upon him, Father. Just thank you so much for his words, for his teaching today. Thank you so much, Lord, that you brought Jim to us today and Steve. We're thankful that your healing hand is on both of them, that you are the God that heals, and that you're helping them through this tough time, this time of adversity. Give them great peace, Father. I'm asking you, and we're asking you to just put your loving hands and your tender mercies upon him, your Hesed love that passes all understanding. Just continue to comfort them in your shalom, Lord. Thank you so much for these guys, for Randy and all that he does for this ministry. Thank you so much for Grit and the Rooted Cafe and all of those that are involved. We ask blessings on these men as they go about doing their job, doing what you called them to do this next week. And we give you all the praise and the glory for the good that you will provide for these men in the coming days. In Yeshua's name we pray.
Amen.